This here is Stellar Blade on a PlayStation 5 balance mode, consuming 230 watts at the wall. And this is a cranked RTX 4090 PC with maximum settings, consuming over 600 plus watts at the wall, almost 3 times as much as the console. That's a lot of heat pumping in your face as you try to enjoy a gameplay session. Gaming PCs can dissipate a lot of heat, especially if you're on a higher end GPU. In the wintertime, this isn't such a big deal, but in the summertime, it can be quite uncomfortable. Now, this video was partially inspired by a follower on X, Diego, but I've actually wanted to make a video that tackles a similar topic of running a more efficient PC setup, because you actually can, with very good results. At a glance, you might say that consoles are designed to be more efficient. Of course, the high-end PC will consume more power to play the same game, and you wouldn't be wrong to say that. But there's more to the story, because the computational load to run this game on the PlayStation 5 and what you're seeing on the screen on PC is vastly different. Listen to what John of Digital Foundry has to say about the PlayStation 5 balance mode.
The balance mode then is more interesting in that this resolution is often lower, ranging between 1080p and 1440p most of the time, yet this one uses temporal upscaling via reconstruction. This one targets 60 frames per second and is indeed very stable most of the time, but it can exhibit dips below 60.
So basically our PlayStation 5 version is running between 1080 to 1440p through dynamic resolution and then being upscaled to 4K through something like TAAU probably. And for what it's worth, the game looks pretty good. I played through half of the game on the PlayStation 5 in balance mode. On a VRR display, it's fine. On PC, however, it's a totally different animal because we are running the game at native 4K. Using NVIDIA DLAA for anti-aliasing, we have maxed all the graphical settings, and it also comes with 4K textures. So the game has much higher resolution textures on the PC than it does on the PlayStation 5, and all the other graphics are maxed out. So the load is of course going to be a lot heavier for this one. Not to mention that we're getting almost twice the amount of frames per second. Basically, on PC, we have the power available to scale the game well beyond what the PlayStation 5 can do, and naturally, that's going to consume a bit more power. But since the PC is the greatest gaming platform, we have full control of our hardware and the game settings as well, so let's go ahead and try to make some tweaks so we can consume a bit less power and less heat. The first step we're going to take is very simple. You can even do this while playing the game, and that is setting a 60 frames per second cap, just like what's on the console. And previously, we were pulling 640 watts up the wall, and now we're down to 400 watts, guys. Just like that, we shaved 240 watts by setting a 60 frames per second cap. And I've spoken about this in a lot of my videos. Personally, I like to use frame rate caps, so this kind of shows a similar process that I usually go through while playing games, and if I want to tweak things depending on what I'm looking for. I normally like to run a bit efficient. I find it very beneficial, as you're going to get to see. Alright, so 400 watts isn't bad for what we're getting here. Native 4K with DLAA. But again, PC is the ultimate gaming platform, and we have access to the best technologies available currently. And if we drop from DLAA to DLSS performance, now we drop all the way down to 220 watts, guys. And we still have that 60 frames per second cap, by the way. Now we're consuming very similar power to what the PlayStation 5 was pulling off the wall, but our image quality looks far superior because we're using DLSS transformer model, which does a much better job than any reconstruction method out there, with FSR4 following very closely behind. Some people will often argue you shouldn't have to use upscaling in an expensive GPU and this and that. Screw that. I mean, this is very impressive technology that is only available because the hardware has advanced as much as it has. Why would you not use this? To my eye, DLSS performance looks damn near the same as DLAA, and that is very impressive. You can use this tech not only to get more frames, but to get a more efficient system. If we were to use the modern console as a barometer of power consumption and/or efficiency, and you take into account the resolutions and settings they're using, you could easily match that on PC on any somewhat modern GPU by replicating those parameters, if possible. And because the PC has more advanced overall technology, you'd end up with more consistent frame rates and image quality too. So to recap what we did so far, we started by pulling over 650 watts off the wall with an uncapped frame rate and maximum settings, to shaving more than 200 watts by just applying a 60 FPS cap, to matching the PlayStation 5's power consumption by dropping from 4K DLAA to DLSS performance. We're consuming a third of the power we started with and not overburdening our environment with a ton of heat that we need to deal with. Now, to talk about my personal preference, I'm okay with a 90 FPS cap for these type of games, and that's what we've done here, set a 90 FPS cap. Now we're consuming a little bit more power, but not really all that much more. We're at around 300 to 330 watts. We're still consuming half the amount of power that we were initially. So that is a big drop, and the game still feels very I mean, 90 FPS is really, really good. I usually try to go for that with these type of games. 90 to 120, I'm okay with that. Although 60 is still very playable for me, I am okay with that. Of course, it will depend on the game. Speaking of which, if we were to look at Cyberpunk, for example, at 4K with DLSS transformer quality mode and Psycho ray tracing, well, yeah, we are going to consume peak power here, 680, almost 700 watts, guys. That is nuts. But then again, we are running Cyberpunk with maximum ray tracing at 4K. So you got to remember that when you play on PC, everything is unlocked and you can max out your hardware to your heart's desire. Whereas on console, it's a lockdown system and developers are tweaking the settings to be able to get hopefully a 60 FPS mode or a 40 or a 30 or whatever it might be. Whereas on PC, I mean, you can scale everything. So yeah, that does require a little bit more effort if you wanted to tweak things, but you can, is all I'm saying, if you wanted your PC to consume less power and less heat in your room. I mean, a lot of people have air conditioners. For me personally, it's not really an issue, but I still don't like to run a loud system. You know, I like to tweak things personally. It's just in my nature to do so, and probably a lot of us are like that. If you're building your own PCs and customizing things, you know, it makes sense. Now here's the thing, just because the game is hecka demanding, that doesn't mean that we can't tweak it with some very minimal image quality loss. For example, if we set Cyberpunk to 1440p instead and drop DLSS to balance with the 60 FPS cap, if you play on a 4K OLED display, even dropping to 1440p actually can look really nice. At least I think so. It's very playable, especially if you use a big screen TV and you play on the couch. I do that all the time. And we essentially cut our power consumption in half, basically. And we still have all the same settings. We've just dropped the resolution a little and a little bit more aggressive upscaling. But with DLSS 4 transformer model, it still looks really, really nice, the game. Different games will require different tweaks, but also different GPU architectures react differently. For example, this is Expedition 33 4K Epic preset, maxed out essentially with DLSS quality. We're getting 100 FPS and 360 watts GPU power consumption. Add another 150 or so to 200 and you end up with total power, more or less. These same exact settings, but on a 7900 XTX, but using XeSS Ultra quality this time, which is the same resolution scale percentage as DLSS quality. Well, now we're getting 70 FPS, so quite a bit less than the 4090, but we're also consuming over 60 to 70 watts more than the 4090. This is a different GPU architecture, and they're going to scale a little bit differently. If we now go ahead and drop the graphical preset to high from Epic and use DLSS performance and XeSS balance, which is 50% resolution upscale for both, well, now we do drop in power consumption considerably. Well, on the RTX 4090 anyway. On the 7900 XTX, we went from 400 watts to around 300 or so. 4090 is all the way down to around 170, 180 watts. So there you go. You get to see how different architectures scale a little bit differently. Some architectures are a little bit more power hungry than others and don't scale as well. For example, the RDNA 3 7900 XTX is a pretty good example of that, although there is other tweaks that you can do. Lower power limit, try to undervolt a little, but the easiest way, again, to make some of these changes is by using upscaling, because upscaling is very good right now. Frame rate caps, lowering graphical settings. If you try to use path tracing, obviously that's going to be extremely demanding, and you cannot meet a console in power consumption when you use path tracing, because that's so computationally heavy, it's not even an option for a console, right? So it all makes sense. But ultimately, this high power consumption concern really is only a thing if you have very high-end GPUs, because those are the ones that consume a ton of power. For example, if we move over to my RX 9060 XT 16GB and we look at the alters at 1440p, all the settings maxed out, and we're using XeSS Ultra Quality, which is 67% resolution up, and we're consuming around 310 watts at the wall. But this is worst case scenario because the GPU is fully maxed out at 100%. So on a build like this, you wouldn't have to worry much about heat because you're consuming a little bit more than a PlayStation 5, right? 230 to 300, that is very close. I think a lot of people sometimes misunderstand how computers dissipate heat and how that heat is generated because they look at their CPU temperature or the GPU temperature, but it's got nothing to do with that. It's got to do with the amount of power and wattage that is being consumed by your device. Now, since PC gaming is the ultimate gaming platform because we have full freedom to mess with our settings and hardware, that doesn't mean that there isn't any room for improvement still in this particular case. For example, if we just set a simple 60 FPS cap, we drop another 100 watts. We're now below 200 watts, and the game still looks really good, by the way, and we're consuming less power than a PlayStation 5 would. And if you play on a 4K display, OLED display, with these settings, the game still looks really, really good. Well, that's going to be it for this video, guys. Leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have any other tips? Because, you know, this is a very interesting topic, and I always hear people talk about how, you know, PC gaming in the summertime is painful. I think the hardest part about PC gaming is that if you have a 4090 or a 7900 XTX or another high-end GPU, right, it's going to be a bit difficult to lock settings down and use more aggressive upscaling or set a frame rate cap because you don't have to. You can max things out and play, but that does come at a cost. I don't think that's anything negative towards PC gaming because you have the power available to use if you want to, instead of, say, being in a console where you don't have the power and you're limited by that power envelope that they had to design the console around. That's not really a negative for PC gaming, but you can most certainly tweak things to consume less power if you wanted to. So yeah, very interesting video I've been wanting to make for a while, and thanks to Diego for kind of suggesting it, even though he probably didn't mean to.